Hi.
Hello. In this segment, Ray expands upon his thought about the monarchical arrangement or tendency that's observable even at the turn of the 2nd century, that is, in the works of Ignatius of Antioch. Ray says, the bonds uniting Christians initially had been their common faith and hope, their mutual love as members of the Christian family. They had gathered together in their individual cities and towns as free individuals, not dominated or controlled by any overarching authority structure. Within half a century of the death of the apostles, this was now radically changing. The direction in which the church was going in the 2nd century AD and the forces moving it in that direction are set out in Schaff's history, and this is a direct quote from Schaff. The whole church spirit of the age tended towards centralization. It everywhere felt a demand for compact, solid unity, and this inward bent, amidst the surrounding dangers of persecution and heresy, carried the church irresistibly towards the episcopate, that is, congregational government by a single overseer. In so critical and stormy a time, the principle, union is strength, division is weakness, prevailed over all. Such a unity was offered in the bishop, that is, overseer, who held a monarchical, or more properly, a patriarchal relation to the congregation. In the bishop was found the visible representative of Christ, the great head of the whole church. In the bishop, the whole religious posture of the people towards God and towards Christ had its outward support and guide.
Now we'll go back to Ray. Calls for loyalty and submission to this visible authority were voiced by various early Christian writers. In the Clementine homilies, the following is said to an overseer: "And your work is to order the things are proper. That of the brethren is to submit, and not to disobey. Therefore, submitting, they shall be saved, but disobeying they shall be punished by the Lord, because the president, the presiding overseer, is entrusted with the place of Christ. Wherefore indeed honor or contempt shown to the president is handed on to Christ, and from Christ to God. And this I have said, that these brethren may not be ignorant of the danger they incur by disobedience to you, because whoever disobeys your orders disobeys Christ, and he who disobeys Christ offends God." That's the end of quote.
This simplistic reasoning, Ray goes on, that the presiding overseer represented Christ and that therefore whatever he instructed should be received as though it came from Christ, exercised coercive force over congregation members, shackling them. It notably fails to qualify the exhortation by including the question of whether the overseer's instructions harmonized with those of Christ, or were instead contrary to Christ's instructions. In the latter case, they deserve to be disobeyed. Even though not directly contrary, they might deserve to be questioned as instructions that nonetheless went beyond what the scriptures required, and therefore that could be submitted to or not as personal conscience and judgment might dictate. This authoritarian injunction was an apparent attempt to clothe imperfect humans with honor that belongs only to the perfect master. If accepted in the absolutist form in which it is stated, with the subsequent suppression of personal judgment, it would make persons the disciples of men, followers of men, even as the Apostle Paul had forewarned. However plausible or appealing the argument, it was pernicious, the result of perverted thinking. Yet, virtually the identical argument is used in much the same way and with the same effect to this day.
A similar call for implicit congregational obedience to and reverential respect for human authority is found in Ignatius's writings. In the early 2nd century, as he employs this argument, and this is the quote, "For we ought to receive every one whom the master of the house sent to be over his household, as we would him that sent him. It is manifest, therefore, that we should look upon the bishop the sole overseer, even as we would upon the Lord himself. End of quote. Now Ray says, compare this 2nd century exhortation regarding submission to the bishop with these words, quote, to abandon or repudiate the Lord's chosen instrument means to abandon or repudiate the Lord himself, upon the principle that he who rejects the servant sent by the master thereby rejects the master. End of quote. And he is quoting Ignatius.
The latter quotation is from the 20th century, from the May 1, 1922 edition of the Watchtower, which sought thereby to induce loyalty to the teachings of the first Watchtower president, Charles T. Russell. The material went on to say, quote, then to repudiate him, that is Russell, and his work is equivalent to a repudiation of the Lord upon the principle heretofore announced. And then Ray comments, 18 centuries intervened between the writings of Ignatius and that of the Watchtower, yet the argument is identical, the same plausibility of reasoning, the same pernicious effect of making persons the followers of humans. The same argument continues to be used today. The only difference is that loyalty to Russell is now transferred to the organization, presented as the Lord's chosen instrument, which can be disobeyed only at the cost of being guilty of repudiating Christ. It is somehow thought that because such high authority and honor is assigned to a collective group rather than to an individual, this makes it proper. This is specious reasoning, which, even as was true in the 2nd century, succeeds in influencing many who seem unable to discern its fallacy. It's so intriguing that since he wrote these words, now they've reverted back to the theological justification for this devotion to the teachings of men. They have denied what they once taught, that Russell was the faithful and discreet servant in himself, moved over to the collective, and now are moving back towards, well, it's the authority of the faithful and discreet slave which gives authority to the organization.
Yeah, and that you should respect the governing body, and if you don't, you're disrespecting God.
Yeah. And in effect, as Ray plainly says here, the bishop and or the governing body and or the faithful and discreet slave has replaced Christ. So again, no coincidence that they refer to the leaders, at least before they used to, as the anointed. I think that concept is still with us in thought, if not if not used as much in the publications as it once was.
It would just automatically make you elevate their abilities above your own.
But check out 1 John 2 and you realize that the very thing that they say sets apart their priesthood, the anointed, the 144,000, is the very thing that John says protects the entire flock. You have an anointing from the Holy One.
It was prevalent even with John still there.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean everyone, but some.
Even the Apostle John, the last remaining of the apostles, does not say, cling to me.
No.
He says, you have an anointing from the Holy One.